Honesty. That's the answer. So everyone who just wanted an answer, you may leave now. But if you want to stick by and hear me explain my reasoning for this, I'm glad to have you. Tracing is a very hotly debated topic in the art community, and for good reason. Some people are completely against it and others stand by it no matter what. And since I'm a human with opinions and a big interest in art, I wanted to present my opinions on this topic as well as discuss others' opinions. Now, obviously, there aren't really right or wrong opinions on this stuff, but I do want to say that I know my opinions can very well be misinformed, and what I wanted to get out of this video was a deeper understanding of others' opinions. So once you finish watching this video, I'd be really happy if you commented your opinion about all of this and see if you agree or disagree with me. But now that that's out of the way, let's get to discussing. First of all, I'd like to begin with discussing the practical use of tracing. Let's set aside any moral or ethical questions for the moment and just focus on the question, is tracing useful? And well, yeah, it can definitely be useful at times, but it can also hinder you. Frankly, it's a very nuanced and subjective thing, but I'll try to give more concrete examples of exactly when I think it's useful and when I think it can be harmful. I think most people who have been interested in drawing as a child have traced over a drawing at least once, and I think that's actually a very useful thing. Even if you don't actually understand the underlying structure of what you're drawing, just tracing the outline helps you develop your line confidence and hand-eye coordination. Overall, it's a very useful thing for getting comfortable with drawing. Another thing is tracing over other people's drawings or pictures to get the outline so that you can focus on learning coloring or shading. This can be very useful as well. I think it's great if you only really want to focus on one specific part to practice. Basically, when your intent is to learn how to, for example, color better, instead of spending a lot of time sketching out the anatomy and then lining a piece, you can just trace over a picture and use that as a base. And that lets you spend way more time on what you actually want to practice, in this case, coloring. But once you've gotten comfortable with the act of drawing, you have to eventually learn the fundamentals and the underlying structure of what you're drawing. This is when instead of just tracing over the outline of something, I'd suggest you try to draw guidelines over a piece to better understand what you're actually drawing. I think the best way to utilize this type of tracing is when learning anatomy, and the way that's worked best for me is this. First, you find a reference picture. Preferably a photo, but a drawing works as well. Just be aware that in that case you'll be studying how someone else draws and stylizes stuff and not actually anatomy. Second, trace over that picture and try to mark out proportions and the like as you go. And then, instead of using that as a base for your drawing, you try to redraw the guidelines by yourself. And then from that, you can either use your redraw as a base, or if you feel like you haven't gotten it quite right, compare with the guidelines you drew by tracing over the picture, and try to see where you didn't get it right and try to keep that in mind for next time. For example, if you made the jaw too sharp or the forehead too big. The reason this is more effective than just trying to reference a drawing without tracing over it is because when you're tracing over it, it helps you think about how things actually look in 3D, as well as puts the shapes you're drawing into your muscle memory. And quite frankly, referencing simple guidelines is way easier than a whole picture. To summarize, getting comfortable to draw, skipping the sketching phase, and easier referencing are all things tracing helps you with. But now I'd like to mention two scenarios where it might not. The first one is, to put it bluntly, it's when you rely on it too much. When you purely rely on tracing pictures or others' art, it will only harm your artistic development. If you only trace, you won't really learn how anatomy, perspective, or any number of things really work. And while yes, you'll get a bit better over time, your improvement when tracing is significantly slower compared to, well, when not tracing. Though it would be wrong for me not to point out that not all people really want to get good at art. And I mean, if your goal isn't to improve but just draw something, then I can't really say that tracing is not a way to achieve that better or faster. The second scenario is something I actually asked you guys about beforehand, and that's the act of tracing AI generated pictures. By the way, thank you so much for all the comments on that short. Everyone was very kind and useful. I read through all of the comments and it helped me see this whole thing from a few different perspectives. I'll try to put up some good comments in the background as I talk, but basically I think most people were in consensus that tracing AI art is bad mainly for the fact that it's not art. There's no human thought or even logic behind what it has made. It's an algorithm that puts pixels in the most probable place. I mean, you've all seen the hands AI makes. Tracing over that is in no way better for learning than tracing over real art or pictures. But since AI is such a controversial topic, especially regarding the ethics of it, I think now is a good time to talk about the ethics behind this whole tracing thing. Now, like I said, I personally think that tracing AI is just practically worse than tracing real art or pictures, but how about ethically? Well, I've seen some people say that AI isn't made by a person, so you're not stealing anyone's art when tracing it. And while, yeah, that's sorta technically true, that's like saying you're not stealing when you take a couple $100 from a person who just robbed a bank. Any form of generative AI currently relies on human training data, and this means that in order for it to be able to generate any type of art, it has to, without the artist's permission usually, take their art to train the model. This essentially means that while yes, you're not tracing over any specific artist's work, you're more tracing over a hodgepodge of tons of stolen pieces of art. And on top of all that, even if AI pieces didn't belong to anyone, wouldn't it still be deceptive to trace it and post it without making it clear that you have traced? Well, regardless, even if you don't agree with me on any of that, since, well, yeah, it's pretty subjective, I think you have to agree on the fact that AI is bad for the environment. It uses a lot of electricity and water, combined with the fact that the materials that are used for the components that run the models are often sourced unethically. I just think at the current moment, there's no way I'd really recommend tracing AI, let alone using it. But now, let's move on to the ethics of tracing non-AI pieces. Remember my point that tracing AI will help you draw better and faster? Yeah, I want you to ask yourself how you feel about the idea of someone tracing just to draw something faster or better. And now I want you to ask yourself why you feel like that. If you're anything like me, you might have said something like, it feels wrong or deceptive. But that only really applies to when the person posts or shows off that art, right? I mean, if they simply draw for themselves, or even if they post it but make it very clear what they traced, that wouldn't really be wrong, right? Though one counter argument to that would be if the person were to trace art of an artist who specifically said they were not okay with tracing, or a picture that they don't have the rights to. In that case, I think it would be undeniably wrong to post it. This whole thought process just made me realize that what most people, including me, don't like isn't the tracing itself, but instead the fact that someone is being dishonest. But then there's the question on if you should be required to state in your post that you, for example, traced a picture of your own hand. I mean, that seems rather extreme. And does it really make a difference in the end? I mean, a lot of the most famous traditional painters we know of most likely traced. And yet, I doubt anyone really cares if they did that. And I doubt anyone would say that they would need to put a little note next to the painting saying, I traced the fabric on the bottom right of this painting. Well, why is that? Well, it's not like they're tracing someone else's work, it's most likely a photo. And on top of that, they are relying on their own skill to adapt that picture into their own work. And I think that's still really admirable. In summary, what this video has made me realize is that 1. There's nothing at all wrong with tracing just for yourself to learn. Even if it might not be the most super effective way to learn, it does still help and can actually be very useful at times. 2. Tracing AI art is not really useful, so I wouldn't recommend doing it. 3. There aren't really any problems with tracing pictures you yourself took, though try to not rely on it too much if your goal is to improve at art. And 4. As long as you have made it clear what you have traced, credited the original owner, and the thing you traced does not belong to a person who has said you're not allowed to trace it, then there should be no problem with posting your traced art. At the end of the day, as long as you don't have any bad or deceptive intentions and are honest about what you do, I'm all for that. Oh wait, I'm supposed to do an outro? Well, hi! Thank you so much for watching this video. It's a bit different from my past videos, but I really enjoy discussing topics like these, so I'll probably end up making another video like this at some point. I hope I've been able to make you see my point of view on all this stuff. But now, I really want to hear your opinion on tracing. So please tell me if you agree with anything I've said in this video, or if you think I'm a total baboon who doesn't know what they're talking about. I'll appreciate the comment either way. But well, that's all I really had to say. If you enjoyed this video or it helped you in any way, I'm glad to hear it. And if it didn't, I'm glad you stayed along for the ride anyway. Keep being honest and see you next time.